My name is Scott, a 33-year-old architectural engineer from Boston. Despite my professional accomplishments, I've always been the invisible middle child in my family. Last Thanksgiving, that reality hit harder than ever when my father thanked each of my siblings in his annual speech except me. Instead of causing a scene, I smiled, took a family photo, and quietly left. The caption I posted that evening changed everything in my family forever. Before I share what happened, where are you watching from? Hit like and subscribe. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, this story might just heal something in both of us. I grew up in suburban Connecticut in a sprawling colonial house with a perfectly manicured lawn and a family that appeared just as polished from the outside. The Henderson family, my parents, Richard and Martha, and us 4 siblings, seemed like something straight out of a Hallmark movie. But appearances, as they often do, masked a more complicated reality beneath the surface. My brother Marcus, 5 years my senior and now 38, was the undisputed golden child. From the moment he picked up a football in elementary school, his path was set. Captain of every sports team valedictorian, and now a cardiovascular surgeon at one of Boston's top hospitals. Marcus married his college sweetheart Emily, had 2 picture-perfect children, and lived in a house that could have been featured in Architectural Digest, though he never asked for my professional opinion on the design. Bethany, my sister, who's just 2 years older than me, and now 36, was the charismatic one. While Marcus conquered athletics and academics, Bethany ruled the social sphere. Her magnetic personality and artistic talents eventually led her to become a beloved local news anchor in Hartford. People in our hometown still mention with pride when they see her on television. Her husband Kevin works in marketing, and they make an enviably photogenic couple. Then there's Jason, my younger brother by 4 years now, 29. As the baby of the family, Jason enjoyed a level of leniency and affection that the rest of us never experienced. Despite his string of failed business ventures, the organic juice bar that lasted 6 months, the smartphone app that never launched, the cryptocurrency investment scheme that cost him most of his savings, our parents never wavered in their creative, enthusiastic support. He's finding himself, my mother would say, while writing another check to fund his next idea. And somewhere in the middle of this family constellation was me, Scott, the reliable one, the steady one, the one who never caused trouble but also never quite stood out. When Marcus was winning state championships, I was getting solid B's in my classes. When Bethany was being crowned prom queen, I was quietly designing sets for the school play. When Jason needed help with his homework or a ride home from a party, I was the one who showed up without complaint. I can't pinpoint exactly when I realized my place in the family hierarchy, but certain memories stand out with painful clarity. There was my 16th birthday when my parents missed my small celebration because Marcus had a college recruitment dinner the same evening. Or my high school graduation where they arrived late and left early because Bethany had a dance recital. Or the time I made the dean's list at college and my excited phone call home was cut short because Jason had gotten into minor trouble at school and needed their attention. The pattern was consistent and unmistakable. My achievements were acknowledged with distracted nods and quick, "That's nice, honey" responses before the conversation inevitably shifted to one of my siblings. It wasn't that my parents didn't love me. I never doubted that, but their attention had clear priorities, and I wasn't one of them. I adapted by becoming fiercely independent. While my siblings relied on our parents for emotional and often financial support, I learned to solve my own problems. I worked part-time jobs throughout high school and college. I applied for scholarships without help. I figured out my own FAFSA forms and apartment leases. I became an adult long before I should have needed to be one. Architecture became my sanctuary. The precision of lines, the beauty of structural integrity, the way spaces could make people feel things without saying a word, it all spoke to something inside me. Perhaps I was drawn to creating spaces where people would feel acknowledged, welcomed, seen. Or maybe I just liked the fact that in architecture every element has a purpose. Nothing is overlooked or unnecessary. After graduating with honors from Cornell's architecture program, a ceremony my parents attended but left halfway through to get Jason to his summer job orientation, I moved to Boston. The distance from Connecticut was both physical and emotional. In Boston, I could be known for my work, rather than as Marcus's brother or Bethany's less outgoing sibling, or Jason's responsible older brother. I built my life there one careful brick at a time, just as deliberately as the buildings I helped design. I created a fortress of self-sufficiency that no one could breach, but as I would eventually learn, I also built walls that kept out more than just disappointment. My early years in Boston were lean and challenging. Entry-level positions in prestigious architectural firms are notoriously competitive, and while my portfolio was strong, I lacked the network connections that many of my peers enjoyed. I started at Jensen & Associates, a mid-sized firm known for commercial projects, working 60-hour weeks for a salary that barely covered my modest apartment and student loan payments. The first 2 years were a blur of coffee-fueled nights, rejected design proposals, and learning the harsh realities of turning artistic vision into profitable projects. I shared a cramped office with 2 other junior architects, often staying long after they'd left to refine my work. My immediate supervisor, a stern woman named Patricia, rarely offered praise, but was quick with criticism. Rather than discouraging me, this environment reinforced what I'd learned growing up: recognition had to be earned through exceptional work, not expected as a birthright. It was during this period that I met Laura. Unlike the carefully structured environment of my workplace meeting, Laura was all chance and chaos. A spilled coffee at a crowded cafe, her architectural magazine soaked my profuse apologies, and her unexpected laughter. Laura was a graphic designer, with a boldness I both admired and found slightly terrifying. She wore bright colors in a city of neutrals and asked direct questions in a culture of polite deflection. "You talk about your projects with passion, but yourself with distance," she observed on our third date. "It's like you're 2 different people." With Laura, I slowly began to emerge from the protective shell I'd built around myself. She dragged me to art exhibitions and impromptu weekend trips. She asked about my family, and actually waited for complete answers. When I received my first substantial project lead, designing a community library branch, she bought champagne and insisted we celebrate, even though the project was months from approval. The library design became my first professional triumph. I incorporated elements that reflected the neighborhood's industrial history, while creating warm, inviting spaces that encouraged community gathering. When the project won a regional award for civic architecture, Laura framed the certificate and hung it prominently in our shared apartment, even though my name was listed among several others on the team. "This is worth celebrating," she insisted when I tried to downplay it. "Why won't you let yourself enjoy your success?" Despite Laura's support, or perhaps because of its unfamiliarity, I struggled to fully open up. I called home monthly, offering edited versions of my life that emphasized stability over achievement. I visited Connecticut for major holidays, but kept my stays brief. I deflected Laura's suggestions about introducing her to my family with vague excuses about busy schedules and bad timing. After 3 years together, the strain became too much. "I can't keep trying to reach someone who's built such thick walls," Laura said during our final conversation. "You're present in body but absent in spirit, Scott. You've never let me all the way in, and I don't think you know how." Her departure left a void that I filled with work. I channeled my heartbreak into an innovative design for a sustainable office building that caught the attention of senior management. By my 6th year at Jensen & Associates, I had been promoted to lead designer with my own small team. My distinctive approach to merging practical functionality with subtle artistic elements began to gain recognition in industry publications. Through it all, Andrew remained my constant. We'd met at an industry conference my first year in Boston, and forged a friendship based on shared interests and his relentless refusal to accept my tendency toward isolation. Andrew was boisterous where I was reserved, spontaneous where I was methodical, but we shared a deep appreciation for architectural integrity and honest communication. "Your family really did a number on you," Andrew observed one evening over beers after I'd mentioned skipping my parents' anniversary celebration. "You know that, right?" I brushed off his comment, but the truth in it lingered. I had created a life that was professionally fulfilling but emotionally compartmentalized. I documented my projects, travels, and occasional social outings through photography, a hobby I'd developed in college, creating a visual record that somehow felt more tangible than my actual experiences. Each captured moment served as evidence I exist. I am here. This is mine. Last year I had skipped Thanksgiving entirely, claiming a work deadline that didn't actually exist. Instead, I'd spent the day alone in my apartment, drafting personal projects and ignoring the hollow feeling in my chest. But this year felt different. Perhaps it was turning 33, or maybe it was the growing recognition that my emotional fortress had become a prison. Whatever the reason, I decided to return home for Thanksgiving, carrying with me a carefully nurtured hope that things might somehow be different. As Thanksgiving approached, I found myself investing unusual effort in the visit. I decided to bake an elaborate pumpkin cheesecake with a ginger snap crust and caramel drizzle, a recipe I'd perfected over several solo holidays but never shared with my family. The process was therapeutic measuring, mixing the precision of temperatures and timing. The finished dessert looked professional, worthy of display in any bakery window. I packaged it carefully for the 3-hour drive from Boston to my childhood home in Greenwich, Connecticut. The journey gave me too much time to think. I rehearsed conversations in my head, imagined moments of connection with each family member. Pictured myself finally sharing my recent professional achievements. A major museum renovation I was leading. And a feature in Architectural Review, our magazine. I had even brought a copy tucked discreetly in my overnight bag. Not to brag, I told myself, but just in case someone showed interest. I had made a promise to myself before leaving Boston this visit would be different. I would make genuine efforts to connect, to share more of my actual life, rather than the sanitized version I usually presented. I would stay present rather than mentally checking out when conversations inevitably drifted away from anything concerning me. I would be patient with the family dynamics, rather than reflexively withdrawing. The familiar streets of my hometown stirred a complex mixture of nostalgia and unease. Greenwich had always been a place of pristine affluence, and my parents' neighborhood particularly so. The houses grew larger and more imposing as I approached their street until I pulled into the long driveway of the colonial home where I'd grown up. The property looked immaculate. As always, professional landscaping, tasteful holiday decorations, not a fallen leaf in sight. My father's German luxury sedan and my mother's SUV sat in their usual spots. I wasn't the first to arrive. Bethany's sleek crossover and Marcus's family-sized SUV were already parked in the circular driveway. Only Jason seemed to be missing still. Taking a deep breath, I gathered my overnight bag, carefully balanced the cheesecake container, and approached the front door. The house smelled exactly as it always did during holidays: cinnamon roasting turkey, my mother's signature cranberry orange relish. The foyer was decorated with gourds and autumn leaves arranged in the perfectly imperfect way that suggested professional decorating made to look casual. From deeper in the house came the sounds of conversation and laughter. "Scott, you made it." My mother appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on an embroidered dish towel. Martha Henderson, at 62, remained striking, silver-streaked dark hair in a perfect bob-tailored slacks and cashmere sweater, minimal but expensive jewelry. She embraced me briefly, careful not to disturb her outfit or makeup. "Everyone's in the family room. Is that a dessert? How thoughtful. You can put it in the kitchen with the others." The kitchen counter already displayed an array of pies from a high-end local bakery, their boxes stacked neatly beside them. I placed my homemade cheesecake among them, suddenly feeling foolish for the effort I'd put into it. My mother had already disappeared back toward the family room, without waiting for me. I found the rest of the family exactly where she'd indicated. The large, comfortable room with its stone fireplace and wall of windows overlooking the backyard contained the familiar tableau of Henderson holiday gatherings. Marcus stood by the fireplace, one arm around his wife Emily, the other holding a tumbler of what was certainly my father's expensive scotch. Their children, Taylor, age 10, and Elliot, age 8, sat nearby playing on tablets, occasionally looking up when instructed to greet an adult. Bethany and her husband Kevin occupied the love seat, her animated gestures suggesting she was mid-story. My father Richard sat in his favorite leather armchair, nodding along to whatever Bethany was saying, occasionally checking his watch, a habit from his 40 years in corporate finance that retirement hadn't broken. Look who finally decided to grace us with his presence. Marcus called out, his tone jovial, but with the faint edge that had always characterized our interactions. "The prodigal architect returns." Scott. Bethany jumped up, her professional smile in place. the same one she used for human interest stories on the evening news. It's been forever. She embraced me with a perfume-scented hug. You look exactly the same. My father rose more slowly, extending his hand for a firm handshake. Richard Henderson had always been more comfortable with formal gestures than emotional displays. Good to see you, son. Traffic wasn't too bad, I hope. The usual round of greetings followed, polite inquiries about my drive, brief introductions to Kevin, whom I'd met at least 3 times before but who never seemed to make a lasting impression on anyone. Forced high fives with my nephews, who regarded me with the mild suspicion children reserve for rarely seen relatives. Uncle Scott, did you bring us anything? Taylor asked with the directness only children can get away with. Taylor Emily scolded, though, without much conviction. Actually, I did. I'd stopped at a science museum gift shop on the drive down and purchased educational puzzles for both boys. As I handed them over, I realized I wasn't even sure if they were age-appropriate gifts. The boys accepted them with rehearsed thank yous before immediately returning to their tablets. They're at that age, Marcus explained indulgently. But they're both gifted, you know. Taylor's already in advanced math and Elliot's reading 2 grades above level. Before I could respond, the front door burst open and Jason's voice echoed through the foyer. Sorry, I'm late. Traffic was insane. And then I had to take a call about the investment. My younger brother swept into the room like a gust of wind, immediately becoming the center of attention. At 29, Jason had our father's height and our mother's charm, a combination that had always served him well in avoiding consequences. He was dressed casually, but expensively, with the confident air of someone accustomed to making an entrance. There he is. My father stood immediately, clapping Jason on the shoulder with obvious pride. Just telling everyone about your new venture. Sounds promising. Jason launched into an elaborate explanation of his latest business idea, something involving sustainable home goods and a subscription model, while everyone listened with encouraging nods. I used the diverted attention to slip into the kitchen, ostensibly to help my mother, but really to gather myself before hours of family dynamics. I found her precisely arranging appetizers on a silver platter. Need any help? I offered. For a moment, her professional hostess mask slipped and something softer appeared in her expression. That would be lovely, Scott. Could you arrange these cheese straws? You always had a good eye for presentation. Enraged. It was such a small thing, this brief acknowledgement of something about me, a tiny piece of evidence that she knew me at all, but it kindled a warm spark of hope. Maybe this time really would be different. That spark sustained me as extended family began to arrive. Uncle Frank, my father's brother, with his new wife, who was at least 15 years his junior. Aunt Helen, my mother's sister, perpetually single and fond of offering unsolicited life advice. Cousins with their spouses and children filling the house with the controlled chaos of a large family gathering. Throughout the afternoon, I made consistent efforts to engage. I asked thoughtful questions about others' lives. I mentioned briefly, carefully, the museum project I was leading. I showed genuine interest in my cousins' careers and children. But I couldn't help noticing how conversations seemed to flow around. Rather than to me, how my professional mention was acknowledged with polite nods, before someone asked Marcus about his latest surgical technique, or Bethany about a local celebrity she'd interviewed. As we gathered around the elaborately set dining table, fine china, crystal glasses, silver candlesticks, name cards in my mother's elegant handwriting, I observed my parents' expressions as they surveyed their assembled family. The way they beamed when Marcus described his department's groundbreaking procedure. The way they leaned forward attentively when Bethany mentioned her potential promotion to weekend anchor. The way they indulgently shook their heads at Jason's enthusiastic but vague business projections. And I wondered with a familiar ache beneath my ribs if they had any idea who I really was at all. The Thanksgiving dinner itself was a masterpiece of traditional American excess. The 20-pound turkey, golden and glistening, dominated the center of the table. Surrounding it were the requisite side dishes, each in its designated serving bowl that appeared only for holiday occasions. Velvet smooth mashed potatoes with a well of melted butter in the center, stuffing rich with herbs and sausage, green bean casserole topped with crispy fried onions, maple glazed carrots, sweet potato casserole crowned with toasted marshmallows, cranberry sauce, both homemade and canned, the latter a concession to Uncle Frank's nostalgic preference. Dinner rolls still warm from the oven, and gravy in a silver boat that had belonged to my grandmother. Wine flowed freely, an expensive Pinot Noir that my father had selected specifically for the occasion, described in terms of terroir and tannins that suggested he'd recently read a wine magazine. Crystal glasses clinked, silverware gleamed, and conversation buzzed around the extended table. "Remember the Thanksgiving when Scott set off the smoke alarm trying to help in the kitchen?" Aunt Helen said during a lull, smiling in my direction. "How old were you then, honey? 12? Before I could answer, Bethany jumped in. "Oh my God, yes. And Dad had to use the fire extinguisher on the stovetop. What a disaster." "I believe I was 10, I corrected gently. "And it was Marcus who left the dish towel too close to the burner. I was just the one who tried to help." My clarification hung awkwardly in the air for a moment before my mother smoothly redirected. "Speaking of disasters, did I tell everyone about Taylor's science fair project? Marcus, tell them what happened with the volcano." And just like that, the conversation shifted away again. It was such a familiar pattern that I almost had to admire its consistency. I took a sip of wine and caught Uncle Frank watching me with an expression that might have been sympathy. I made one more attempt to share my professional news when Jason finished describing his supply chain challenges. "I'm actually leading the renovation design for the Harrington Museum now," I said, addressing the general table. "It's a significant historical preservation project balancing modern functionality with 19th century architectural elements." "Oh, that's nice," my mother said with a distracted smile. "Bethany, didn't you do a segment on that museum last year? Something about a stolen painting that was recovered." "That's right," Bethany seized the opening. "It was a Monet that had been missing for decades." The curator cried during our interview. "We got an incredible response from viewers." I cut a piece of turkey on my plate with precise movements, the familiar disappointment settling into its usual place in my chest. Beside me, my cousin's wife Melissa leaned over. "That sounds like a fascinating project," she said quietly. "My sister's an art historian. I'd love to hear more about it sometime." I smiled gratefully at her, this relative by marriage, who'd shown more interest in my work than my own family. "I'd be happy to give you a private tour when it's finished." As the dinner plates were cleared and dessert was being prepared in the kitchen, my father rose from his seat at the head of the table, tapping his glass with a spoon. The room gradually quieted attention, turning to Richard Henderson in his holiday sweater and carefully pressed slacks. His silver hair distinguished his posture, still commanding despite his 70 years. "Before we move on to dessert, I'd like to say a few words," he announced, his corporate executive voice automatically commanding respect. "Thanksgiving is about gratitude, and this year I feel particularly grateful for this family we've built." He lifted his wineglass slightly. "As I look around this table, I'm reminded of how fortunate Martha and I have been in our children." My heart rate increased slightly. This was new. My father rarely made speeches at family gatherings beyond a perfunctory toast. I straightened in my chair, a small, hopeful thought surfacing. Maybe this is it. Maybe this is when he sees me too. Marcus, my father, began, turning toward my oldest brother. "Your mother and I couldn't be prouder of the man you've become. Your dedication to your patients, your groundbreaking work in cardiovascular surgery, you're literally saving lives every day. And beyond that, you've given us 2 amazing grandchildren and built a beautiful family with Emily. You exemplify everything we hoped you would become." Marcus nodded solemnly, accepting the praise as his due. Emily beamed beside him, squeezing his hand on the table. My father shifted his gaze. "Bethany, our beautiful daughter, your intelligence and charisma shine through in everything you do. The way you've built your career in media, becoming a trusted voice in the community, using your platform to highlight important causes, we couldn't be more proud. You and Kevin have created a wonderful life together, and your recent nomination for that regional broadcasting award just confirms what we already knew: you're exceptional." Bethany's eyes glistened slightly as she smiled back at our father. Kevin looked at her adoringly, his arm around her shoulders. My father's gaze moved again, and I felt myself sitting taller. A lifetime of hope, difficult to extinguish, despite decades of evidence. And Jason, my father, continued, his voice warming even further. Our youngest. Some might look at your path and see only the challenges, but your mother and I see your persistence, your creativity, your refusal to be limited by convention. Each venture teaches you something new, and we have absolute faith that your current project will be the one that showcases your unique talents to the world. Your entrepreneurial spirit reminds me of myself at your age. Jason raised his glass in acknowledgement, his expression shifting from pleased to determined. It won't let you down, Dad. We know you won't, my mother added from her end of the table. My father smiled broadly, looking around the assembled family. Martha and I are blessed beyond measure with our children, their spouses, our grandchildren, and all of you who join us today. So please, raise a glass to family, to gratitude, and to many more holidays together. Glasses lifted around the table. To family came the chorus of voices. I raised my glass mechanically, my own voice absent from the toast. The oversight was so complete, so absolute, that for a moment I wondered if I had somehow become invisible, if I had faded from physical reality while sitting at the table. The pain was sharp and immediate, a physical sensation beneath my sternum. I looked around to see if anyone else had noticed the omission. Aunt Helen was frowning slightly, her eyes darting between my father and me. Uncle Frank studied his wineglass with sudden intensity. Cousin Melissa, who had spoken to me earlier, looked uncomfortable. Richard, Aunt Helen said with forced brightness, I think you forgot. My father, already halfway back to his seat, paused. Oh. His expression registered brief confusion, then awkward recognition. And Scott, too, of course. Always reliable Scott. He gave a perfunctory nod in my direction before sitting down. Now I believe there's pumpkin pie waiting. The conversation immediately resumed around me, the awkward moment already fading for everyone else. My mother hurried to the kitchen to organize dessert service. Marcus launched into a story about his son's soccer tournament. No one looked at me directly. I sat perfectly still, my expression carefully neutral, the skill of hiding my feelings honed through years of similar moments. But inside, something had finally broken, a last thread of hope that had somehow survived despite everything. With deliberate calm, I reached for my phone. Let me get a family photo before dessert, I suggested, my voice impressively steady. Everyone looked this way. They arranged themselves, obligingly, practiced smiles appearing automatically. I stepped back, framed the shot of my family at the Thanksgiving table, the family that had just confirmed beyond any remaining doubt that I was an afterthought in their narrative. Perfect, I said, reviewing the image. I'll send it to everyone later. While my mother and Aunt Helen served dessert, including my untouched cheesecake, which no one recognized as mine, I quietly excused myself to use the restroom. Instead, I collected my coat from the foyer closet, picked up my overnight bag that I hadn't yet taken upstairs, and slipped out the front door into the crisp November evening. No one noticed my departure. The drive back to Boston should have taken 3 hours. Instead, it took nearly 4 as I pulled over twice when tears blurred my vision too severely for safe driving. The rational part of my brain insisted I was overreacting to something that should have lost its power to hurt me long ago. But the emotional reality was different. There's something uniquely painful about having your worst fears confirmed so completely, about having hope extinguished so thoroughly. Around the Massachusetts border, I pulled into a roadside diner called Maggie's. It was past 9 in the evening, and the place was nearly empty, just a couple of truckers at the counter and an elderly couple in a corner booth. I slid into a booth far from the other patrons, ordered coffee and a slice of pie I didn't want, and stared at the family photo on my phone. There they all were, smiling and content, glasses raised in a toast to one another. A perfect family portrait. No one looking at it would notice anything amiss. No one would see that moments before the man behind the camera had been erased from the family narrative. With fingers that trembled slightly, I opened Instagram. I rarely posted personal content, using my account primarily for architectural photographs and professional networking. But something in me had shifted irrevocably at that dinner table. The careful walls I'd built between my professional and personal lives, the protective distance I'd maintained, the silent acceptance of my assigned role. It all seemed suddenly unbearably false. I uploaded the family photo and began typing. Thanksgiving 2025. Today I sat at my family's table, and listened as my father thanked each of my siblings individually. Their accomplishments, their children, their spouses, their potential. He spoke about Marcus saving lives as a surgeon, Bethany's media career, Jason's entrepreneurial spirit. When he finished, he'd covered everyone but me. When my aunt tried to remind him, he added, and Scott too, of course, as an awkward afterthought before changing the subject. I am 33 years old. I lead the architectural team renovating the Harrington Museum. My work was featured in Architectural Review last month. I've designed award-winning public spaces. I brought a homemade cheesecake that no one realized was mine. I have spent my entire life trying to be seen by the people in this photo. Today, I finally accepted that won't happen. And that's okay. My worth isn't determined by their recognition. I've built a life I'm proud of, with or without their awareness. To anyone who feels invisible in their own family, you are seen. Your value exists independently of others' ability to recognize it. Build your life for yourself, not for the validation you may never receive. P.S. I left right after taking this photo. I wonder how long it will take them to notice I'm gone. I stared at the draft for several minutes, my finger hovering over the post button. This wasn't like me. I didn't share personal struggles publicly. I didn't air family laundry. I didn't rock boats or make scenes. But then again, perhaps that was exactly the problem. I pressed post and set my phone face down on the table. The waitress refilled my coffee without asking, giving me a sympathetic look that suggested my emotional state was more visible than I'd thought. Tough holiday, she asked. Just family stuff, I replied with a wan smile. Ain't it always? She shook her head knowingly. Refills are on the house tonight, honey. By the time I finished my coffee and untouched pie, my phone was buzzing continuously with notifications. I paid my bill, left the waitress a generous tip, and sat in my car scrolling through the responses in disbelief. The post had struck a nerve. College friends, professional colleagues, acquaintances, and complete strangers were commenting with their own stories of family invisibility. The post was being shared. Screenshots were circulating. People I barely knew were sending direct messages sharing deeply personal experiences of family dynamics similar to mine. Andrew had texted separately. About damn time you said something. Proud of you. Doors open if you need a place to crash tonight. I started my car and headed toward his apartment rather than my empty condo. The weight on my chest hadn't lifted entirely, but it had shifted somehow, as though by naming it publicly I'd changed its composition. Andrew was waiting with beer and a frozen pizza when I arrived. He didn't ask for details, he'd seen the post, but simply offered his couch and his company. We watched mindless action movies until past midnight when my phone rang with a number I immediately recognized. My mother. I considered letting it go to voicemail, but after the third call in succession, I stepped into Andrew's kitchen for privacy and answered. Hello. Scott. My mother's voice was thick with emotion, almost unrecognizable. Scott. We just saw your post. Where are you? Are you okay? We've been looking all over for you. I left hours ago, Mom. I'm in Boston. You drove all the way back to Boston without saying goodbye. Her tone shifted from concern to indignation, then back to distress. Your father and I have been calling hospitals. We thought something had happened to you. Something did happen, Mom. My voice was quiet but firm. Dad gave a speech thanking everyone but me. And when Aunt Helen tried to remind him, he tacked on my name like an obligation he'd forgotten. Then everyone went right back to normal because it was normal. That's how it's always been. That's not true, she protested, but her voice lacked conviction. Your father was just caught up in the moment. He didn't mean, it doesn't matter what he meant. It matters what he did, what you all do consistently. There was a long pause filled only with the sound of her uneven breathing. When she spoke again, her voice was different, smaller, stripped of its usual polish. I saw what you wrote, she said, about the museum and the magazine. I didn't know, Scott. Why didn't you tell us? The question was so genuinely bewildered that I almost laughed. I've tried, Mom. For years. But there's always something more important happening with Marcus or Bethany or Jason. Another silence, longer this time. I could almost see her mental review of past conversations, searching for evidence to refute my claim and coming up empty. I'm so sorry, she finally whispered, and to my shock she began to sob, not the dignified tears she permitted herself at weddings or funerals, but raw, messy crying. I'm so sorry, Scott. I had no idea you felt this way. None of us did. Her evident distress pierced through some of my defensive armor. It's not entirely your fault, I conceded. I stopped trying after a while. It was easier to keep my distance than to keep hoping for something that never happened. Please, she said when she'd regained some composure, please come back this weekend. We need to talk about this, all of us as a family. Your father, Island. He's devastated, Scott. We all are. I don't know if that's a good idea. Please, she repeated. I'm not asking you to pretend everything's fine. I'm asking for a chance to listen. Really listen this time. I closed my eyes, leaning against Andrew's refrigerator. The easy path would be to say no to maintain the safe distance I'd established. But the truth was, I'd already crossed a line by posting publicly. There was no going back to polite avoidance. Okay, I finally agreed. Not tomorrow, I need some time. But I'll come on Saturday. Just for the day. Thank you, she breathed. We'll be here. All of us. After we hung up, I stood motionless in Andrew's kitchen trying to process what had just happened. My phone continued to buzz with notifications as the post spread further. I silenced it and returned to the living room, where Andrew was pretending not to have overheard. So he said, opening another beer. Saturday should be interesting. Despite everything, I found myself laughing. A rusty, uncertain sound, but genuine. Yeah, I agreed, accepting the beer. I guess it will be. I arrived at my parents' house at precisely 11 on Saturday morning. The driveway was full. All my siblings' cars were already there, suggesting this had indeed become the family event my mother had promised. I sat in my car for several minutes, gathering my resolve before approaching the front door. This time no one left me waiting in the foyer. The door opened before I could knock, revealing my mother. She looked different than she had on Thanksgiving. Her hair less perfectly, styled her face free of makeup, her usual tailored outfit replaced by a simple sweater and slacks. Most strikingly, her eyes were red-rimmed and anxious. You came, she said, as though she'd half expected me to change my mind. Everyone's in the living room. She led me through the house, her hand lightly touching my arm as if to ensure I wouldn't disappear. The formal living room, rarely used except for special occasions, had been arranged with chairs in a rough circle. My father sat in his usual armchair but looked uncharacteristically diminished. His shoulders hunched, his expression uncertain. Marcus and Bethany occupied the sofa, both looking uncomfortable. Jason paced near the windows, stopping abruptly when he saw me. The atmosphere was thick with tension, so unlike the polished surface of our usual gatherings that it was almost unrecognizable as a family meeting. Scott, my father said, rising halfway from his chair before sitting back down. Thank you for coming. I took the remaining empty chair, acutely aware of all eyes on me. Mom said you wanted to talk. An awkward silence followed. My family, usually so skilled at filling spaces with words, seemed at a loss. Finally, my father cleared his throat. Your post, he began, then stopped, seemingly unsure how to continue. I want to say it's not true, but you can't, I finished for him. Because it is true. I never meant to exclude you, he said, his voice uncharacteristically defensive. You've always been so. Self-sufficient. You never seemed to need acknowledgement the way the others did. Everyone needs acknowledgement, Dad. Especially from their parents. My mother had taken a seat next to my father, her hands twisting in her lap. We thought you were fine, she said quietly. You never complained. You never demanded attention. You just handled everything yourself. Because I learned early that asking wouldn't get me anywhere. I replied, trying to keep the bitterness from my voice. Every time I tried to share something important to me, the subject changed to Marcus's medical career, or Bethany's latest interview, or Jason's newest idea. Marcus shifted uncomfortably on the sofa. That's not entirely fair, Scott. You became distant. You moved to Boston and barely visited. You never called just to chat. How were we supposed to know what was happening in your life? I send emails about my projects. I tried to mention the museum renovation at Thanksgiving dinner, but Mom immediately changed the subject to Bethany's news segment about the same museum. Bethany flinched. I didn't realize. I thought you were just making conversation. That's the problem, I said, feeling a lifetime of suppressed frustration rising to the surface. None of you realize. None of you notice. I've spent my entire life being overlooked in this family, and it became so normal that even I started to accept it as inevitable. My father's face had grown increasingly troubled. Scott, I never intended to hurt you on Thanksgiving. When Helen reminded me, I felt terrible, but the moment had passed and I didn't know how to fix it without making it worse. It's not about Thanksgiving, I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. Thanksgiving was just the final confirmation of what I've always known. You see Marcus as the successful one, Bethany as the charismatic one, Jason as the one with potential, and me, I'm just there. The reliable middle child who doesn't need attention because he'll be fine regardless. That's not how we see you, my mother protested. Then how do you see me, I challenged. Tell me 3 things about my current life. Not my childhood, not general traits. Specific details about who I am and what matters to me right now. The resulting silence was excruciating. My parents exchanged helpless glances. Marcus studied the carpet. Bethany bit her lip. Jason had resumed pacing. You're an architect, my mother finally offered. You live in Boston. You like photography. Such basic, surface-level observations from the woman who had raised me. I nodded slowly. That's exactly my point. This isn't fair, Marcus said suddenly. You're acting like you're the only one with problems in this family. Do you have any idea what it's like being the oldest? The constant pressure to be perfect, to set the example. To know that every achievement is just meeting expectations rather than exceeding them. I stared at him, genuinely surprised by his outburst. At least you got attention, Bethany jumped in. Do you know why I became so outgoing, Scott? Because it was the only way to be noticed between Marcus's achievements and Jason being the baby. If I wasn't constantly performing, I disappeared completely. And I'm sick of being the family screw-up, Jason added heatedly. The one everyone indulges but no one actually respects. At least you both had your clear roles. I'm just the perpetual disappointment who keeps getting chance after chance because no one expects me to actually succeed. Boys, please, my mother began, but my father raised his hand. No, Martha. Let them speak. I think we need to hear this. The conversation that followed was unlike any our family had ever had. Years of unspoken resentments, misunderstandings, and pain poured out from all sides. Marcus revealed the crushing weight of being the golden child, how every minor failure felt catastrophic. Bethany described her exhaustion from constantly maintaining her charismatic persona, her fear that without it she'd be forgettable. Jason admitted his serial entrepreneurship was partly driven by a desperate need to prove himself worthy of the family name. And most surprisingly, they all expressed variations of the same shocking belief that our parents had favored me. You were always the one they trusted, Marcus said. The responsible one who never caused problems. You gotta be authentic, Bethany added. I had to be on all the time, but you could just be yourself. And they respected you, Jason said quietly. They might not have said it, but they did. With me, it was always indulgence, not respect. I listened in disbelief as each sibling described a family dynamic almost unrecognizable from my experience. In their version, I was the secure one, the one with an unshakable place in the family system. How could you possibly think I was favored, I finally asked. Dad literally forgot I existed during his Thanksgiving speech. Because he takes you for granted, my mother said. Suddenly, her voice thick with emotion. We all do. You're our rock, Scott. The dependable one. The one who never falls apart or needs rescuing. My father nodded slowly. Your siblings have always been more demonstrative in their needs. You were the child who somehow raised himself. We didn't worry about you because you seemed to have everything under control. That wasn't a gift you gave me, I said softly. It was a burden I had to carry. I learned to be self-sufficient because I had no other choice. The room fell silent again. But this time, it was a different quality of silence. Contemplative, rather than awkward. Heavy with realization, rather than tension. I had no idea, my mother finally whispered. All these years we've all been suffering in our own ways and none of us saw it. What kind of family are we? A human one, my father answered, his voice uncharacteristically humble. One that got so caught up in our assigned roles that we stopped seeing each other clearly. He turned to face me directly, his eyes moist. Scott, I failed you as a father. Not just at Thanksgiving, but consistently for years. I didn't recognize your achievements because I took your success for granted. I didn't offer support because I assumed you didn't need it. I didn't acknowledge your pain because I didn't look closely enough to see it. I had imagined confronting my family many times over the years, but I had never envisioned this, my father acknowledging his failure with such raw honesty. It disarmed me completely. I didn't post that photo to hurt you, I said. I just couldn't pretend anymore. You shouldn't have had to pretend, Bethany said. None of us should have. My mother had begun to cry silently, tears streaming down her face. Can we fix this? She asked. Is it too late? I looked around at my family. Really looked at them, perhaps for the first time, seeing beyond my own pain to recognize theirs. Marcus carrying the weight of impossible expectations. Bethany exhausted from constant performance. Jason desperate to find his place. My parents realizing too late the unintended consequences of their parenting approach. I don't know, I answered honestly, but I think recognizing the problem is a necessary first step. Jason approached hesitantly and sat on the arm of my chair. For what it's worth, I saw your Instagram. The museum looks amazing, Scott. I had no idea you were doing work at that level. The cheesecake was yours, wasn't it, my mother asked suddenly. The one with the ginger snap crust. I should have known it was too perfect to be store-bought. These small recognitions, minor in themselves but significant in their attentiveness, felt like the first drops of rain after a long drought. I think my father said slowly that we all need to learn how to be a different kind of family. One where we actually see each other as we are, not as the roles we've been assigned. No one disagreed. As the afternoon progressed into evening, we continued talking tentatively at first, then with increasing openness. We ordered pizza instead of attempting a formal meal, eating in the living room rather than at the dining table, breaking all the usual Henderson family rules about proper entertainment. By the time I left to drive back to Boston, nothing had been fully resolved. Decades of family dynamics couldn't be undone in a single day, but something fundamental had shifted. For the first time, I had spoken my truth to my family, and for the first time they had actually heard it. As I hugged my mother goodbye, she whispered, "This is just the beginning, Scott. I promise we'll do better." I wanted to believe her. Despite everything, a small, resilient part of me still did. 6 months have passed since that Thanksgiving revelation, and the Henderson family is slowly learning what healing looks like. It hasn't been a straight path forward. There have been setbacks, moments of falling back into old patterns, uncomfortable confrontations, when new awareness illuminates past hurts. But there has also been genuine progress, moments of connection that would have seemed impossible before. My parents, to their credit, took immediate action. My mother researched family therapists and found Dr. Eleanor Matthews, who specializes in adult family systems. We've had both individual and group sessions, some in person, others via video conference to accommodate our scattered locations. It's been challenging work requiring a level of emotional honesty that doesn't come naturally to any of us. Family patterns are like rivers that have carved canyons over time. Dr. Matthews told us in our third session. You can't fill the canyon overnight, but you can gradually change the river's course. That analogy has stayed with me through the months of slow, sometimes painful recalibration of our relationships. We've established new communication patterns, a family group text where we share personal and professional updates, a monthly video call where each person gets dedicated time to speak without interruption, a shared digital calendar where we note important events in each other's lives. My relationship with each sibling has evolved in ways I couldn't have anticipated. Marcus and I meet monthly for lunch halfway between Boston and Hartford, where his hospital is located. Behind his perfectionist facade, I've discovered a man with a self-deprecating sense of humor and genuine curiosity about architecture. I always thought you had it figured out, he admitted during our second lunch. You seemed so confident in your path while I was constantly terrified of making a mistake. Bethany and I have developed a different kind of connection. She visited the Harrington Museum during the final phase of renovation, bringing a videographer to create a special segment on the historical preservation aspects. Seeing her professional skills turn towards something I cared about was healing in ways I hadn't expected. I've always admired your integrity, she told me. Off camera. The way you build things that last. Perhaps most surprisingly, Jason and I have discovered a complementary dynamic. His entrepreneurial creativity paired with my practical implementation skills has led to a side project, a sustainable housing concept that combines his environmental passion with my architectural expertise. It's too early to know if it will succeed financially, but the collaboration itself feels valuable. My parents have made their own efforts. My father, retired now with time to reflect, has been systematically educating himself about my career. He subscribes to architectural journals, visits buildings I've designed. When traveling, asks thoughtful questions about technical aspects of my work. My mother has become the family historian, creating albums that deliberately highlight events from all our lives, equally including mining my photography archives for images I'd taken but rarely shared. Last month, they visited Boston specifically to see the completed Harrington Museum renovation. Watching my father walk through the spaces I'd designed, noting the details I'd fought to preserve and the modern elements I'd integrated, I saw something I'd always craved but never expected: genuine pride in his eyes. "This is extraordinary craftsmanship, Scott," he said, touching the restored molding in the main gallery. "You've honored the past while creating something new. That's a rare gift." The compliment wasn't lavish by objective standards, but coming from Richard Henderson, a man who had spent decades reserving his praise for my siblings, it felt monumental. The viral post that started this transformation has had unexpected consequences beyond my family. The honest caption resonated with thousands of people who felt similarly invisible in their own families. I've received hundreds of messages from middle children, family peacemakers, the responsible ones who recognize their own experiences in mine. One of those messages came from Samantha, a landscape architect who had worked on the grounds surrounding the Harrington Museum. "Your post gave me the courage to have a long overdue conversation with my own family," she wrote. That initial message led to coffee, which led to professional collaboration, which led to a friendship that has become increasingly important in my life. My professional life has flourished in parallel with these personal developments. The museum renovation received an AIA award for historical preservation, leading to similar commissions. Without the emotional weight of family disappointment constantly dragging at me, I've found new creative energy for my work. But the most profound change has been internal. The walls I built for protection over decades haven't disappeared entirely. Such deep defensive structures don't vanish overnight, but they've become more permeable. I'm learning to let people in to express needs and disappointments, instead of silently absorbing them to expect recognition rather than resignation. This past Thanksgiving was different in every way, from the one that precipitated our family transformation. We gathered at my condo in Boston neutral territory. A deliberate choice. The meal was potluck style, with each person contributing a dish that held personal significance. The table was casual, the conversation genuine. Before eating, we tried something new, an appreciation circle. Each person took a turn, speaking directly to each family member, acknowledging something specific they valued about that person. When it came to my father's turn to speak about me, he didn't falter or generalize. "Scott," he said, his voice steady, "your integrity as a designer mirrors your integrity as a person. You build spaces that bring people together just as you've helped rebuild this family." I'm not only proud of what you create, I'm proud of who you are. No single conversation can heal decades of emotional neglect. No single acknowledgement can fill the void of years of oversight. But that moment being truly seen by the person whose recognition I'd sought for so long felt like a foundation upon which something new could be built. As I look back on this journey, I understand now that families can hurt each other deeply without malicious intent. Patterns establish themselves so gradually that no one notices the canyons being carved until they seem impossible to cross. Speaking your truth, however, uncomfortable, is sometimes the only bridge across that divide. I also understand that healing isn't a destination, but a practice. The Henderson family is still learning, still making mistakes, still occasionally falling into old habits. But we're doing it with awareness now, with the willingness to acknowledge harm and try again. Most importantly, I've learned that belonging to yourself must come before belonging to anyone else. The validation I sought from my family for so many years could never have filled the void of my own self-recognition. The caption I wrote that night at Maggie's diner was as much a message to myself as it was to my family. Your worth exists independently of others' ability to recognize it. That truth still stands. But there's a beautiful balance in finding your own worthwhile, also being properly valued by those who should love you best. Have you ever felt invisible in your own family? Or perhaps you were the golden child carrying the weight of everyone's expectations. Maybe you recognize yourself in Bethany's constant performance, or Jason's desperate need to prove himself. Wherever you see yourself in this family story, I hope you know that healing is possible, that patterns can change, and that speaking your truth, however frightening, is often the first step toward being truly seen. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more stories of family transformation. Share this video with someone who might need to know they're not alone in their family struggles. Drop a comment about your own experience. The community that's formed in these comments has become a source of support for so many. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember your worth is inherent whether others recognize it or not.